What if everything we think about mental health is wrong? We live in a global mental health crisis, with depression the leading cause of disability worldwide, according to the World Health Organization, and burnout, suicidal thinking, and complete anxiety affecting more and more of us than ever before. I mean, this group likes raising their hands, right? Good. Raise your hand if you or someone close to you has recently struggled with their mental health. 99% of the room is affected in some way. And so today I want to offer you some insight into how we can redefine the limits that our current mental health system places upon us, and how perhaps our diagnoses sometimes keeps us in a fixed state, stuck in a place of numbing and avoiding perhaps the real information that our mental health symptoms are telling us. So often we're turning the volume down on what our body is telling us, and actually we should turn the volume up. Listen to the information that is affecting our lives. So as a parent and a psychotherapist with over 2 decades of experience in this field, I want to talk you through how we can do that. But before I do that, let me tell you a little story. Back when I was 25, I hit my own rock bottom point. Complete despair, suicidal thinking, and overwhelm. And finally, I got the courage to go to my doctor and ask for help. We all know how hard that can be, right? That first time that we ask for help. So into the doctor's office I went. My chin was quivering and tears were in my eyes. And I sat down and maybe said 2 or 3 sentences about what I was struggling with. The doctor seemed to avoid eye contact. He was looking down. Shuffled through his papers, and eventually he pulled out a form, which I now know to be the PHQ-9 form, a leading questionnaire in assessing the symptoms of depression. In only 9 questions, you can actually move from a place of, hey, this is normal behavior, and this is a depressive symptom. So he asked me some questions. He said, are you tired? Yes. Are you having some sleepless nights regularly? Are you hopeless, in despair? 9 questions checking in on how I was feeling. I obviously ticked yes to enough of the questions on this questionnaire for him to silently scribble a prescription for a leading antidepressant on his pad, slip it over to me, and then silently point to the door. In 8 minutes, I now had a label, a title, something that would define me moving forward. Now, I left this appointment. I'm sure he said, come back in a few weeks or something like that, and we'll check on how you're doing. But as I walked out, I left more confused than when I'd walked in. Did I have depression? Was this a life sentence? Was my brain chemically imbalanced? What was I supposed to do with this little pill, if I chose to take it, going to fix me? How was I going to move my life forward? Of course, what the doctor had no way of knowing, because it wasn't on the questionnaire, was tired. I had a baby and toddler at home. Tick, tired, sleepless nights, of course. I was also born and raised in one of the most notorious religious cults on the planet. That wasn't on the questionnaire. And over the last couple of years, I had moved from everything that I knew, the culture that I'd been raised in, the belief systems that I had, and I had moved to London, had 2 children, and was desperately trying to fit in to the world that I had found myself in, desperately trying to be this version of normal, until the cracks started to show. So I could have had depression, but now I know I also could have been experiencing grief. I could have been experiencing deep loneliness at leaving everything that I knew behind, complete exhaustion, and of course, post-traumatic stress symptoms from the complex story that I'd experienced. And so over the years, in order to fix myself, I ended up studying psychotherapy, mental health. I worked in youth mental health, but mostly on this quest to both fix myself and support my young children so that they wouldn't experience that generational trauma cycle that can often carry on throughout life. And so I wondered, is our approach to mental health wrong? Is it the most useful for us to be thinking about a label, one part of the story to capture somebody's complex existence? The thing is, what helped me was actually not professionals, sometimes a little bit, but it actually helped me to go to recovery groups. So I found out that alcohol addiction was one of the biggest ways that I was using to try and cope with my previous trauma. And there was something about being in this room with other addicts, no professional insight, just a few rules for how we would engage with each other. The first times I sat in these rooms, I just watched other people. I was in the back, silently just watching, shaking, thinking nobody would think I belonged here. And slowly I just observed people being brutally honest about their stories, the cultures they'd come from, and the oppressive power structures that had affected them. And then slowly, maybe week 3 or 4 or 5, with my own chin quivering again, that's how I cry, and tears streaming down my cheeks, I would maybe say one sentence. And I wouldn't even say how I was raised. I would say, I'm a parent, and this is hard. And eventually, I learned a few things from these groups. One was how to be honest. So first by observing, and then learning to fully be myself, letting go of all the intense expectations that I'd had growing up. The second thing was how to be accountable. So that meant both taking responsibility for the skills that I needed to learn in order to live a good life, and also to have people around me that could sense check me. So one of the things in recovery groups is you get people's numbers, and when you're in the struggle, you call them before you overthink it. And you go, I'm in the struggle, I'm honest. And they go, how can I help? And they don't try and fix you, and they don't say what label you have. They're just simply there to listen. And so this led me to think, is something about our mental health recovery, should it only be done over there, one-to-one with this professional, hidden behind closed doors? Or is there something in our mental health crisis about leaning in and connecting to each other? So as I began to qualify, I began to think, are there other people in the medical profession or psychological professions that might back me up in thinking that we might be, thinking about this in a different way? More and more of us are being diagnosed with mental disorders. But I've also noticed that more people's lives are shrinking and getting smaller once they have that label. Maybe it's telling them that, I have an anxiety disorder, so I cannot go out and do that brave thing. I have depressive disorder, so it's perfectly understandable for me to keep the curtains shut and not engage with the world. And so were these labels taking away from the skills that we actually all can develop in order to live good and healthy lives? And so I looked into the science. First of all, there was neuroscience, and I've only got 18 minutes, so I'm going to rush through the previous research because I want to make sure I can present some new ideas to you. But Dr. Joe Dispenza is a leading neuroscientist who talks about self-directed neuroplasticity. And that really is the ability for your brain to continue to develop new neural pathways. And that meant nothing was fixed. We didn't have to stay in this one place if our brain could actually consistently develop. Nobody told me that back when I was struggling. Johan Hari has done some TED Talks and also done extensive research in the worlds of addiction and depression. And he noticed throughout all his research in different countries that there was this common denominator for people who were experiencing depression and anxiety. And that common thread was a feeling of disconnection, perhaps from their societies, their religions, their community, or belief systems. So that said to me, this was more a symptom of our lifestyles than just something that one person was feeling as an imbalance in their brain. And then more recently, I had the privilege of watching Joanna Moncrief and her team present some new research live. Now, they went and did research in 2025 this year for all of the research on serotonin. You know that happy chemical that we're all chasing? Yeah? It's easier in the summer, I know. And she found with her team that there's no convincing evidence that depression is caused by a chemical imbalance. Now, this radically shifts this idea that if we have this fixed problem, then there must also be this fixed solution. And so today, while I could go into more research, I want to spend the next few minutes telling you about some recent research I discovered that suddenly I realized completely opened up this idea that we could think about our mental health in a different way. In 2018, a project paper was published by the British Psychological Society, and it was called the Power-Threat-Meaning Framework, an Alternative to Psychiatric Diagnosis. And a book came out by the same name in 2020. And I read this book from cover to cover. I mean, I'm a total geek, so I will do that. But also, it's a short book, so it's okay. Anyone can sort of read through it. But what was fascinating was the research was done by both mental health professionals, a whole range of them, but also mental health service users, so people who were on the receiving end of mental health treatment. And there were a few things to consider. They noticed that nobody's emotional distress is actually evidence of a mental illness. For them, they said there is no separate group that is mentally ill, but we all experience emotional distress at times. Now, you can imagine this was quite radical in the psychology field, because they're thinking, what? Like everything is predicated on this idea that those people are mentally ill, me, and those people are mentally healthy. What's interesting is a lot of this is given by Western society. So if you fit in, you're in the normal category. If you don't fit in, if you have a culturally nuanced way of expressing emotional distress, well, then you might have a mental disorder, right? So we're separating people out. And they beautifully said that we can each be active agents in our lives rather than victims of medical illness. It got me thinking that we're kind of putting ourselves, our complex stories and histories, and we're putting them in a box when we just have a label. Am I just depression? It's like we crave certainty as humans. We desperately want that certainty in a world that is very uncertain. And so that box can kind of make us feel safe for a little while. If I have this problem, then I know what I need to look for. But maybe I don't look in my wider circumstances. And so what is the framework? How do we use it? What's interesting is this can be done either as personal reflection with a trusted friend or with a professional. So it's not just rigidly put in the box of being with a professional. And there's a few key questions that can enable us to understand the complexity of our stories and challenge the mental health crisis that we see today. So the questions seem simple. The question is, what happened to you and what have you had to do to survive? That's often where our symptoms show up, right through our stories. The second piece is, how has it affected you? For me, it showed up in depression, addiction, anxiety, a whole host of things. And mental health professionals have this word now called comorbidity, which means you have several things going on at once to try and explain the complexity that is you. It then asks you what your strengths are. What meaning do you make from the experiences that you've had? And to bring it all together, what is your story? So what happened to me? I was raised in a cult, one of the most oppressive power structures that you can imagine. And how it affected me were in my symptoms. But then strengths. Nobody ever asked me what my strengths were. What if that story that I had of growing up in all these places and so many things happening actually had given me a superpower, something that I could pass on to my own children and in the world that I was in myself? Meaning is fascinating. Today we've been hearing stories from speakers who have found their meaning in the things that have happened to them. And this became quite fascinating for me because I was wondering, do you create your meaning? Are some people just lucky that they find their meaning, or is it something that you can create? Well, interestingly, I quite like this saying. What if it's not about everything happening for a reason, but it's about finding your reason for everything happening? When you look at post-traumatic growth theory, so that's the theory of why is it that two people can go through similar adverse effects. One person ends up thriving, maybe ending up on stage like people you've seen today, and the other person doesn't. They continue to get stuck in that feeling of despair. And there are two key things that are common denominators with the people who've learned to thrive. And those two things, one is support groups or support of some kind. Do you have support or do you create and build that support network? Support is somebody who believes you when you tell them your story, who doesn't just try and fix you, but actually provides you backup. And then the second one is meaning. And I found that we can actually build and create our meaning. Remember neuroplasticity? Our brain can always develop and learn new things. So there are absolutely ways that we can figure that out. This is me a while back. And back then, the meaning that I created from my life was one of despair and hopelessness. I didn't go to school as a kid. We thought the world was going to end every 3 years or so. Here we are. And I told myself that drinking and escaping was the only way that I could cope with that history. Over the years, through learning about mental health and neuroplasticity, I've created a completely new story for myself, one that's filled with hope and allows me today to stand on this red circle and talk to you today. In the foreword to the Power Threat Meaning Framework book, clinical psychologist Richard Benchall has this profound quote, because he says life is an accumulation of experiences for each and every one of you in this room and all of our friends and family and people that we know. And there is no pill or treatment that will take us back to how we were before. I sometimes wonder, back when I was 25 in the doctor's office, imagine if he would have looked into my eyes once I told him about the distress that I've experienced. What if he said to me, "What happened to you? What did you have to do to survive? How has it affected you?" And maybe he wouldn't have given me an antidepressant, but maybe on a little piece of paper, he would have passed over some information, a resource on neuroscience, given me some hope that no matter how bad my situation was, there were ways that I would be able to develop in the future. Imagine that. And it makes me think that maybe we have less of a mental health crisis and more a crisis of meaning and connection, where we're all in our isolated boxes trying to fix ourselves instead of leaning in and taking accountability for our own lives and mental health and actually leaning in to support others to do the same. So I sometimes wonder if we would all take responsibility to bravely and gently ask someone, what happened to you? What did you have to do to survive? What support have you had? And what meaning would you create from your life? People often ask me what advice I would give to my younger self. And of course, it's kind of a ridiculous question, sorry. Because we probably wouldn't listen back then, right? But I've thought about it a lot, and I thought, well, the advice I would give my younger self is, it's perfectly reasonable to experience emotional distress when you've been through unreasonable things. I would tell myself that I wasn't broken, that I didn't need to be fixed, that I didn't even need a diagnosis. Some people might, and of course that's completely up to them, but I actually didn't. That the information in my body was useful, and that actually over the years I would be able to create meaning and support others to do the same. So my challenge to you as we move forward today is to ask you to ask someone else, but ask yourself the question as well, what is it that you want to create? Thank you so much for listening.